Melanie is lying in bed when the light in her cell turns on. She gets up and starts getting ready for school. Soon, two soldiers enter the cell. The girl cheerfully greets them, but all they do is strap her to a wheelchair and roll her into the corridor. Lining her up with other such children, they place them in a classroom by numbers, and Melanie asks the teacher Miss Justino to read them a myth, so that it could be a history lesson, and the teacher reads them the myth of Pandora's box. After the lesson, Melanie and the other children are placed back in their cells. Lunch is brought, a plate full of worms. Melanie eats, falling asleep. The next day, Dr. Caldwell comes to Melanie and gives her riddles, explaining that they are logic puzzles. So, did you solve the problem? She asks the girl to solve Schrodinger's cat puzzle, and when she can't answer, the doctor writes something about her behavior, and then reads it out loud, calling Melanie an object. Finally, the doctor asks Melanie for her number, and she says 13. Later, the soldiers again take her and the other children to school. When Melanie is taken past the numbered cells, she sees that number 13 was not opened. In the classroom, the seat with the same number remains empty. The teacher decides to give them a written assignment, and the children are worried because they don't know what to write about. Miss Justina is moved by the girl's story and approaches her, wanting to touch her. Suddenly, Sergeant Parks bursts into the class and yells that touching the children is forbidden, and offers to remind Miss Justina why. He rolls up his sleeve and approaches one of the children, extending his arm. The child sniffs and suddenly unclenches his jaw, trying to bite. The other children mimic the same behavior. Later in the evening, when the sergeant escorts Melanie to her cell, she talks back at him, and he decides to leave her chained to the chair overnight. That same night, when the teacher goes to Melanie and realizes she has been left in that state, she enters the cell and starts removing her restraints. The girl smells the teacher and starts to transform, just like the other children before. Before fully transforming, she tells the teacher to leave. Later that evening, when Caldwell comes to visit her again, they chat and she asks the girl for her number again. Melanie says number 4. Can you tell me any number from 4 again? This time it is the number of her own cell. The next morning, Sergeant Parks comes for Melanie. He wheels her out of the cell and takes her out of the building in an elevator when gunshots are heard. We see soldiers running and shooting towards the fence of the military complex. Melanie is stunned by the sight. Parks takes her to another part of the complex, to the lab where Dr. Caldwell is waiting for her. She asks the girl about Schrodinger's cat again, but not getting the desired answer. She explains that both cats in the box are alive and dead at the same time, just like Melanie. The second doctor sedates the girl, and she passes out instantly. They move her to the operating table and strap her down. Melanie begins to wake up. Suddenly, Miss Justine bursts in to stop them from cutting Melanie. Dr. Caldwell persuades Justine to lower her weapon and sprays her in the face with pepper spray so the soldiers can grab her. The doctor explains to her that she is not just cutting Melanie, but using her as a source for the vaccine. I am preparing an experimental batch of the vaccine. Melanie is taken away, and then the alarm sounds. Caldwell tells another doctor to lower the shutters, but when she does this, a zombie breaks through the glass, immediately biting her. Caldwell kills the zombie, cutting her hand in the process. The other doctor starts to turn into a zombie, but Caldwell escapes from the lab just in time. Melanie is left alone in the lab with the zombie, although it doesn't touch her. The girl grabs a scalpel and frees herself from the straps. Melanie goes outside and sees that the complex is in complete chaos. Zombies are running around and attacking the soldiers while they try to shoot them. Suddenly she sees the soldiers beating Miss Justine. In a rage, she runs to them, attacks and bites them, eventually killing both before losing consciousness. When Justine comes to and sees the girl next to her, she picks her up and carries her to the military vehicle. Zombies completely overrun the complex as the military vehicle drives away. After some time, they stop in the wilderness. Parks and Kirian discover that Melanie is in the car with them, but Justina lets her go, while Dr. Caldwell yells that they shouldn't do that. Melanie runs a little to the side and pauses, seeing the outside world clearly for the first time. The others try to contact other military bases via radio, but to no avail. Dr. Caldwell demands the sergeant return her test subject. They check the car for supplies, but they find neither water nor food, only a mask for zombies. The sergeant suggests heading south to the lighthouse, assuming that everyone at the military base is already dead except for the zombie children. They strap Melanie to the back of the vehicle with belts, put a protective mask on her, and head to the river to get water. At the river, several zombies find them, and a shootout ensues. One of the soldiers is bitten, so Park shoots him when he begins turning into a zombie. Closing the car door, he sees that Melanie has taken Justina inside the cab, making him nervous. Melanie asks who the zombies are, and Caldwell explains that they were people infected by a fungus transmitted through bites. This infection is called by the fungus Cordyceps unilateral. The overall picture is starting to become clear. Meanwhile, Sergeant Parks discovers that the car is broken and they will have to walk through London. A faster but more dangerous route. Parks and Kirian survey the perimeter they will have to cross. It is filled with zombies, but they have no choice but to go through them and find shelter and supplies. As soon as they find themselves in the city, they walk between masses of sleeping zombies, trying not to wake them. Suddenly, Parks stops as they reach a dead end. Goldwell accidentally hits a zombie while screaming, but the group escapes. Moving through the zombie-filled streets of the city, they eventually find an abandoned hospital. They go up to the second floor, where it is much safer. Parks, Justine, and Kieran immediately go on patrol. While Caldwell and Melanie are left alone, the girl asks where she comes from. "But do you know where I came from?" The doctor tells her that she and others like her were found in the maternity ward of the hospital. They were children of mothers, who were infected with the fungus while pregnant, so the infection entered their bodies through the placenta. Caldwell tells her that they are different from other zombies. They are capable of interacting almost like real people. Later, Justine returns, finding new clothes for Melanie. That night, Parks and the teacher talk about Melanie, and the sergeant tells her that the girl loves her. While Kirian is guarding her, she also grows fond of him. The next morning, they notice that a whole army of zombies has gathered in front of the hospital, and they can't get out. But Melanie comes up with an idea. Since the zombies won't attack her, she convinces them to let her go outside and find a way to get the zombies away from the building. Dr. Caldwell doesn't like the plan, but with no alternative, the others agree. Before leaving, Melanie asks to put on new clothes. She goes outside and walks past the zombies without any problem. Suddenly, she sees a cat, hunts it down and eats it. Later, she goes into one of the houses and finds a small dog which is used as bait to draw the zombies away from the hospital grounds. The group puts a mask and handcuffs on it, and they continue their journey through the abandoned city, heading towards the lighthouse. On their way, they see something strange, fungus growing out of zombie bodies. This, according to the doctor, is the next stage in the fungus's life cycle. She then tells Melanie that in her body, the fungus behaves more like a symbiote than a parasite. As they move further, they discover a huge mass of bodies growing into a massive fungus, which Caldwell suspects is the reason for the lack of walking zombies. When there are enough of them to gather together, they transform into the mature stage of the fungus, which can pollinate large areas, if not the entire world. On their way, they suddenly find a mobile laboratory and break into the vehicle. Park first tries the engine, then the radio. No response. Kirian goes looking for supplies and Melanie feels uneasy, as if she's about to turn. She tells the group that she needs to eat too, and they let her go out and hunt. The girl quickly finds food and finishes it off. After eating, she hears a strange sound coming from the bookstore. She sneaks over and sees a group of growling children and realizes they are just like her. Suddenly, another child appears and tells the others that he has sensed something, and they all follow him to a mobile laboratory. Caldwell is getting worse. She tells Justine that she has sepsis. Then she starts talking about Melanie again and how she needs the girl's brain and spine to make the vaccine. Justine doesn't like this. Suddenly, Melanie returns and tells them about the children she saw, convinced that they will hunt Kirian. Next, we see Kirian walking down the street and suddenly finding an unopened can on the ground and then another one until he sees a store and sneaks under the shutters to get inside. Once inside, he starts eating and browsing dirty magazines. A little girl appears behind him, startling him. He lures her deeper into the store. When their leader joins them, more children appear and together they all attack Kirian. Meanwhile, Melanie leads Parks and Justin to the place. She senses his smell, just like the other children. Finally, they reach the store, climb inside, and find a half-eaten Kirian there. At that moment, Melanie understands that it was a trap not only for him but for them as well. When they step outside, they see a group of children waiting for them. Melanie challenges the leader, fights him, and kills him to prove to the others that she is stronger. She leads Parks and Justin to a safe place. When they arrive at the laboratory, Caldwell suddenly poisons them with some kind of gas. She drags Melanie to the table to perform the procedure, but stops due to the excruciating pain in her hand. Melanie uses this second to prepare for an attack. The doctor tries to convince the girl to surrender in order to save them all with her vaccine. Melanie almost agrees but asks one last question. She asks if the doctor thinks she is alive or just mimicking human behavior. Caldwell chooses the former. Then Melanie says, "Why do we have to die to save you?" and runs out, leaving the doctor in the lab. The doctor runs after her, but once outside without weapons or protection, she is inevitably attacked by zombie children. Meanwhile, Melanie goes to the huge mushroom they saw earlier. She sets it on fire, intending to activate the spores. Unfortunately, Parks also followed her and got infected. Melanie didn't plan for this. The sergeant asks her to shoot him before he becomes one of them, and Melanie does it. Some time later, Justine wakes up in the lab, protected from the spores, realizing what happened. Melanie is waiting for her outside the lab. In the final scenes of the movie, Justine is awakened by a girl. Some time has passed. The teacher takes a board and starts a lesson with the zombie children, who listens to her from the other side of the lab window. Melanie is now their leader, and they all attend Miss Justina's classes together. That's all.